built-in obsolescence is killing society, and it's killing the education sector, because we need the newest thing, the latest thing. It costs ridiculous amounts of money, and yet throughout all of this, we forget we're in the people business. Okay? People will adapt, they will change. One thing that the world cannot stop is time. Time has to work its magic. And I think the whole pandemic thing illustrated something quite interestingly. This whole rush to Operation Warp Speed accomplished very little, because things are still in the phase of pilot testing of vaccines. And oh, by the way, Pfizer, that predicted theirs is going to be 95% effective, guess what? It's at the normal vaccine effectiveness of 60%. Time works its magic. Education has to work its magic in that sense. And I think, if anything, we have to take a step back. We have to take an inventory of what we've accomplished. We've accomplished a lot. The hybrid model I've alluded to is great evidence of how you can combine things. But what hasn't changed is that applied education graduates roughly cost a company a third to two-thirds less than a graduate directly from a university, because they hit the ground running with competency-based education and skills. It still takes 6 months for that graduate to become absorbed and be productive as an employee. A typical university grad takes 1 year, because they haven't got the competency-based things that applied education takes. That's not going to change, because there's humans involved, there's people involved. I think, if anything, we have to be very wary of speed. Okay, we have to be very wary of the bright, shiny object, and just remember that we're in the people business.
Thank you very much. Really, we are talking that things are things are changing so fast that we can't run so quickly. And if we are approaching the change, it should be systematic. We have to rely on some frameworks which would help us first to understand ourselves, then to implement some new models. Really, if we rely only on tech, if we listen the velocity of tech change, it would confront, it already confronts the human nature. So we have to find a balance. And in this balance, we again have more variables. We have more stakeholders which are involved. We spoke about students, we spoke about education, but I would like to ask you all, how do you think, how three key stakeholder groups, educators, employers, and policymakers shall collaborate to synchronize their activities and ensure harmonious evolution of the education models as we know today? And how do you see that those your institution role in it? So let's start from HCT, Dr. Alex.
It's an interesting question, and I think the concept of the ivory tower is crumbling rapidly in front of our eyes. I think, if you look at the history of education, people looked up to the educator. Okay. Today, education is people are looking beside at the educator at the same level. And the same thing goes with integration with ideas from your external stakeholders. Witness in our room today. We have our IAC partners joining us here. Without that input, the ivory tower will be still in the state it is, where you pontificate and preach everything that you know in a very narrow scope. That can't happen today. And I think that's what is so important, is invite, listen, act on what you heard, and move forward with that.
Thank you very much. I saw a few years ago an excellent graph showing the dynamics of positioning education and industry in industrial revolutions. So commonly, industry is driving a change. So from the first industrial revolution up to the fourth and fifth, it's always industry taking a lead. And in that graph, the period where industry takes a lead before education runs to take it is called the social pain. And when education takes lead, it calls a time of prosperity. So maybe we have to get to this stage, as Dr. Alex mentioned, to understand that education has its own dynamics and that we can't just follow and support industry with all of this demand. We have to find a balance. So please, Dr. Tina.
I just want to say I completely agree with a lot of what you've raised here. And I think I come from the higher education side and the industry side. I've never worked on the policy side, but I think if I had to pinpoint the greatest thing that we could do moving forward, it is to listen. It is to listen and try to truly understand the perspectives of people who, like, for example, I think it is a great point to say there are certain truisms about education that have held true for years, will hold true for years, and it is possible to change too fast if you don't take those into account. I think there's also kind of the side of saying this is the modern world has leapfrogged. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Prensky's concept of the digital native, but when I first started teaching online, this was a huge thing. The idea that there were digital natives and digital immigrants, and those of us who did not grow up in the interconnected world, like me, would never fully be able to get the digital natives, like my son, who was basically born knowing how to steal and use an iPad. But I think one of the things that is increasingly clear to me is that there's really no such thing as a digital native these days, because everything is changing so fast that by the time you come to the point of understanding something, there's already something new. And this is where I think the idea of slowing down really resonates, in the sense of saying we need to first of all, choose some ideas that we think are worth supporting. Stick with those, build those out, kind of stay the course, instead of changing to every new thing that comes along and every new fad, because like the shopping app I talked about, there's one use that's out today, there'll be another more cutting edge thing that's out tomorrow, everything is on demand, everything is new. There is so much coming into the field that if you do just try to, without discriminating, kind of move from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing, you really do run risks, especially as educators. And as educators, the most important thing, and I think you've said this as well, is the students. Keeping the student first and foremost, and keeping their best interests first and foremost. So I think kind of to tie this all back together, to me, really genuinely listening, really genuinely collaborating is the key for all three sides of this sector.
Ms. Kujar, your work is very much oriented towards community, so I would really like to hear from you. What do you think?
Sure, thank you. So in a field where curiosity is a full-time job, really, I think it is important for partners and regulators and all different community members to be updated with what's there. And I think one of the great examples is the which have been mentioned earlier as well, which is the Industry Advisory Council, which is KHT is also part of, and it helps really to sense the needs and also be updated with what's there in certain sectors, which definitely helps in building and shaping the future of learners. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Getting back to EdTech, to hear from them how they can comment our recent
I think
discussion.
you put us on this side on purpose, right? So I do agree maybe with Dr. Alex, but currently in the market we can see that all the EdTech or softwares in general and applications are really cheaper now to grab, and maybe the operational fees are going down and down more and more while we are going forward. And a big example and demonstration of this, having AWS with us, AWS and technologies like cloud has dramatically reduced the operation cost in all the industries, actually, not only education. And AWS and other cloud solution has actually gave us a big platforms to start thinking about how we can, let's say, take the applications to the next level. So, for example, at INJAZAT now we are working on the data, on the NLP. We're producing NLP and we're producing data analytics just to see how we can analyze this huge data that we have and use it in the education sector. For example, now all the students who are graduating after 4 years, we need to understand after 4 years what they are studying now, will it be useful for the industry? And without technology, without big data and analyzing this data and NLP and all this power coming also from the cloud, we cannot do that. So as part from our also product development, we are trying to do that. So we are trying to predict after 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, what are the industries that students need to concentrate on? Teachers and all the education sector need to also concentrate and push their students to that direction. We're talking about also skills and not only the education, the curriculum, the normal curriculum that students are taking. So yeah, I believe still technology is very important in the education sector, and yeah, maybe it's going fast, but I think this speed is matching the evolution of the human being, we can say. When I look at my kids now, I'm a tech savvy, so I know that I used to believe that I know everything about technology. But as you said, when I see my kids now, they're learning things much faster than me, and they are still young. They didn't, go to college like I did. They did not build the skills and experience as I did. So yeah, I think the next generation is, is very fast. Really, they're very fast learners, and we need to cope up with these new generations. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bruno.
I'd like to make another point to defend the higher education institution as something that, as I highlighted earlier, is really important, right? And it has a place that's really crucial. The people that are at the forefront of research. Can you hear me? Okay. People that are at the forefront of research, the greatest thinkers, most of them are in universities, and it's the natural place for them to be. It's a safe location where they can explore and discover new things, and the universities are a great opportunity for students to then go close to those great thinkers and researchers and explorers and obtain that information firsthand, right? There's a lot that's happening out there, but if you on social media websites that promote videos and where people watch videos, and you can see that there's a wealth of information out there. It's a vast amount of information, but higher education institutions, they have the credibility to put the focus on what's important, right? And what we're talking about here is agilizing that focus. It's being able to have that, you made the point earlier of having that interconnectedness. Policymakers need to be aware of this context and need to look and understand what is really important to facilitate this process. It's a process of communication between society, economy, the environment, and these institutions, and what is needed to address these challenges. So it's a constant communication. As you were saying earlier, it's communicating, it's talking, it's expressing ideas, it's seeing what's out there, looking at the data, seeing what works, what doesn't work, being active in that exploration of what's going on, in that analysis. And you need tools to do that. You can't escape it. The information out there that's required to have a decent analysis, not only of the student in their performance, but also the metrics of what's going on in the world. That requires careful analysis of vast amounts of data using tools like machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So that's where I think this needs to happen. So a contribution from my organization, it's essentially that. It's providing you the tools to do the work, right? And that's really what's needed there, and helping you with innovation and thinking ahead of what's coming. Now, going back to the point of the issue of whether technology is moving too fast, etc. It is a reality. It is moving very fast, and I don't see a way to put the brakes on it straight away. There are things that will remain constant, things will fall off, and I think that's part of the discovery process and why it looks so fast. It is that certain things will remain constant and others will have to go away and be phased out. But all those experiments have to be made. That's the reality of it. So.
I didn't understand. I didn't understand Dr. Alex's comment that he is defending, let's say, dynamics of the change in the higher education sector, and so that he was referring more on human nature. And we mentioned in the previous panel also that learners, in that discussion, those were patients, should become the owners of their records, not only medical, but also learning or learner records. So can you just a little bit elaborate about how do you see this shift from the agency of educators to the agency of learners when it comes to utilization of their knowledge or recognition of their knowledge from the industry point of view?
That is a very, very interesting point, and something that I think people need to look carefully at. And there's this concept of stackable credentials, which is being discussed. It's actually, if you look carefully, it will require very close collaboration between organizations, maybe like UNESCO and others, to be able to ratify that if we go down that route of stackable credentials, that these things can be recognized globally, essentially, especially with mobility as we see it happening, right? So from that perspective, in ownership of knowledge, people need to be able to keep, in a way that we talk about data protection and people keeping ownership of their data, and there's a shift in that direction now, which hopefully will start taking hold, is that there needs to be a reliable mechanism to store that information in a reliable way so that everyone can look at it and say, yeah, that is true, that's accredited. And it's not dependent necessarily on the existence of a particular structure, organization, company, whatever you want to do it. And you probably, some of you might see what I'm going at with this. The blockchain technologies facilitates that kind of distributed storage that's highly resilient and independent of the existence even of a country, right? So, and why do I say this? We face big challenges coming ahead with sustainability, with the environment. We're going to see, as the scientists predict, we're going to see an increase in natural disasters and things like this. So we need to increase the resiliency. So this means that, if part of the network or structure, whatever you want to call it, doesn't work, the rest needs to be able to continue operating, right? So going back to your point of ownership, if we have an environment where this happens, where everything is distributedly stored, but preserved with this kind of encoding through blockchain technologies, for example, which AWS supports, for example, people can go there and explore those services if they're curious. But with that, it is possible to store that information, and each individual will have a track record of their progress in education, right? But again, the challenge here is how do we make sure that the individual is able to have a recognized education path that's involved education institution A, part of the curriculum coming from institution A, part of the curriculum coming from institution B, with some vocational training from institution C, and have that sort of as a consistent process. I think that's where the challenge comes, and that will require lots of communication. I'm sure there are initiatives already where that is being addressed, but I think that's probably where the challenge lies. And the good news is that the technology is there to support it. We just need people to communicate and address those issues. Sorry, a long-winded answer.
No problem. So, one more turn with this question, if you don't mind, and then we will have a few minutes for the audience.
Yeah, sure. And commenting with the same, yes, I agree with you that the blockchain now is the technology that can preserve data and can give you some sort of an ownership and genuity on the data itself. Actually, we tried here a POC on this, and we were targeting the attestation of the certificates. Attestation, it takes a lot of process, and you need to have a lot of people approving, like you said, at institution A, B, C, here and there. So, but honestly, to adopt that according to the experience that we got from the POC, we need the whole education sector to adopt this technology. So, for example, HCT cannot just adopt that, and the whole country is working manual or in a different systems. So, in order to preserve that blockchain and to keep following the data, all of the I think it should come from top down. So, I think the legislator need to push the technologies and to push the other industries or the education stakeholders to adopt that technology. So that's it in short, and I don't want to take more time answering this. Thank you.
Ms. Hujar, we know that in the 50-year charter of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, there is a paragraph, if I'm not wrong, number 4, which deals with individual learner records. So does KHDA work something to reach there?
Sure. I mean, as part of the charter, as you said, and with our work with the Dubai Future Foundation, we've been part of the Reg Lab, or the Regulation Lab, in which we've explored how could we recognize online learning before it was, let's say, before the pandemic. And we've worked with schools and different partners to come up with a regulation to allow that to happen. However, it reached to the point that we still need to study it more and see how can we possibly allow it to happen with other regulators as well. So. As my colleagues mentioned, I mean, the technology is there, and I think it's time to have the conversation and take it to the decision makers to make it happen, and allow the learners to learn the way they want, anytime, anywhere, without losing the credentials or proving that they've, let's say, acquired a certain skill or a certain knowledge.
Thank you very much. Tina?
Okay, I just want to say this question kind of taps into this swirling larger conversation around the ethics of big data and ownership and self-ownership of big data. And I think that's a really critical component of where we are right now, is there's data that is volunteered and data that is harvested, and all of us have probably millions of data points swirling around our heads every day that can tell you so much. You probably know more about me if you look at that data than I know about myself. And so how this is kind of operationalized, captured, and deployed for the learner is, to me, the really interesting question. And I work on the side of looking at student ownership, like self-ownership of data, and how you as the student take control of what you want out there, what you decide to use to drive your educational pathway, and then how that kind of loops into how your institution works with you. And I think this is one of the more interesting questions to me, that I don't think that there is one solid answer to it at the moment. There are many potential answers, and probably there will continue to be many potential answers. But I think it all revolves around ownership, and it all revolves around the student understanding the power of what they have to look at, how it applies to them, and how they can harness that power and use it, rather than kind of a third-party entity using it for them.
Thank you. Dr. Alex, we have a few initiatives which are going in that direction. I would like to hear from you about the dynamics as you see it.
So I have to be very careful about how I approach this, because I'd like to take it from a tact of responsibility and accountability. I'm a data wonk. I've lived, grew up, love data and all that kind of stuff. When I see data, I look at it from the perspective of what it's not telling me. Not what it's telling me, but what is not telling me. What is missing in the data. Data is a tool. Credentials, micro-credentials, they're a tool. Blockchain is merely a means of protecting information. Nothing greater, nothing more than that. It provides a conduit for the information to get to another person to do something with it. So let's talk about what we do with that information. It seems to me that we are advocating accountability and responsibility because blockchain is sending me this information, therefore it must be true. The data is saying this, therefore it must be true. But what we're doing is we're giving up the role, especially in the job market. When you see a CV and you do a job interview, you have that ability to discern about the person, the truth of the information they provided, and quite frankly, what their attitude is going to be. I mean, we've all done all of the tests on attitude, aptitude. I'm sure Amazon has some pretty interesting ones just to become a member of the company and the club. But the point is, we as humans have to be able to do something and make decisions on that. And we have to continue to use our instinctual knowledge that I think we've gotten away from, because it appears here, therefore it must be true. And so, again, all this information, okay, is something that we have to distill, and we have the capability of humans to distill it to make decisions around. Okay, and I think we can't advocate that responsibility, that accountability. And what I'd also like to add is that it's kind of led to this whole decision-making by KPI. Okay, we're doing things just to check boxes. Okay, did I get the CV? Do they have the credentials? Do they have this? Oh, I guess they're fit for the job. No, they're not. The person's going to show up in a job interview slouched over like this, okay, that's not going to appear in the CV, and it's not going to appear in the micro-credential. So we can't advocate accountability and responsibility just because we have all this information and tools available to us.
Thank you very much. We have time for one question from the audience. So,
my name is Dr. Fawzi Buslama. I'm in CIS with HCG for over 11 years now. It's a pleasure for me to share this feedback. First of all, I'd like to thank all the members of the panel for the very informative session. My comment is for Dr. Bruno, who talked about blockchain. And in 2020, along with my colleagues, Dr. Lan and Dr. Christine, we have co-chaired and co-organized an important conference about emotional intelligence, well-being, and happiness, which drew over 2,400 participants from all over the world. In that conference, myself and my son, who is a leading scientist in Limina in Canada and North America, we introduced a blockchain-inspired platform for not only documenting, degrees, but also skills, like, emotional intelligence. Because we firmly believe the success of a student is not only academically, demonstrated, but equally important is the soft skills, the readiness to work with others, the self-awareness, understanding your own emotions, empathizing with others. So the first brainstorming, if you want, I presented it along with my son about this new novel platform inspired from the blockchain technology, where everything goes there is verified, authenticated, recognized by all the blocks in the chain, and builds up in the ledger of their students. So thank you for bringing that to the discussion. And I would like, representing myself and HCT and my research team, to continue working with you guys from industry and to collaborate on this idea. So that was my comments and feedback.
thank you so much. And this is basically the purpose of this event, to get together researchers and industry. I would like to close this discussion referring to the book I recently read, written by my colleague Richard Fouquet. The book is called Building Knowledge in Architecture. And this book states that due to the extensive development of technology, we started to forget what the real knowledge is. We started to rely on technology more and more, starting to forget let's say, what this technology serves. And I think that today's discussion was exactly at that point, how to get back to the balance between what we are learning, why we are learning, and how we are learning. And I feel that Dr. Alex would like to close this, so I'm giving you, no? Oh, so wrong impression. So let me close this discussion. Then I would like to thank you all for being here. It was a real pleasure moderating this panel. Thank you for the participation, and I think that we have opened a great discussion to continue. Thank you. Kim, please just share the information about where we are going from here.
What I actually wanted to say was I can't wait for the engaging conversation that follows this panel, and I know we have tons of faculty members here, so if it's all the same to you, we have about 5 or 10 minutes if you want to extend the question period, because I think the discussion would be really engaging with everybody. And then to follow, lunch will be across the hall, same place that you found the coffee earlier. So up to you if you'd like to continue the questioning.
Yeah, so we have time for more questions from the audience. Dr. Akul.
Thank you, Doctor.
Sorry for bringing up data again. Apologies, but we say, healthcare data moves at the speed of trust. What can the regulators, industry, academia do to align so that the speed of data, good data, becomes faster, so that we can apply it where it counts, when my patient is sitting in front of me, to get insights, so I'm not just doing sick care anymore, I'm doing well care. And the outcomes, like Dr. Alex initially said, so that the life expectancy then increases from 79 to probably 89. How do we do that? Any thoughts on how can we align as industry, provider, regulator, academia? Thanks.
Who would like to answer?
Right, so to answer the question, I mean, naturally, people would expect me to have a technology-oriented answer, but I'm going to come from the other end. I think what needs to happen, there's no running away from it. Data is digital, so it's stored on computing systems, so let's get that out of the way. Okay, so in the cloud is a perfect place to put that, all that, and you'd expect me to say that. With that joke aside, one thing that's really, really important, going back to the issue of communication, is that healthcare providers, researchers, the industry, policymakers are in tight communication all the time. And I'm based out of the UK, and I can see the kind of conversations that are happening there, both at the infrastructure council that I'm sort of helping to support, the Science Technology Facilities Council, but also in groups like Health Data Research UK, groups like this that are discussing actively these things. That's it, they're discussing actively these things. They're talking about how to do it, and they're conceptualizing it. So there's this concept of a trusted research environment that in theory is going to address not just the healthcare issue, but it's being born out of the healthcare issue. That's where the most concerns are in terms of personal identifiable data, et cetera, et cetera. So that discussion needs to happen. The models need to be formulated. People need to define the meaning of trust. What does it mean to trust the data? And what are then the human processes that need to go around that to support that activity? And how do we make them as effective as possible, as the least onerous as possible on time, on process, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want an overly bureaucratic system that doesn't let you work. You want something that lets you work, but has trust built in, okay? I'm going to come up with a naughty example, but for example, Airbnb, the company that does, go out and rent someone else's sofa, so to speak. They've built, the reason why that platform works so well is because they've looked at the usability of the platform, and they designed for trust. Everything, the positioning of the information on the page, the kind of information that's requested, the way the exchanges are done, they optimize for trust, right? So, and similarly, that conversation needs to happen, not as a project, not as something that you do once, okay, now we know what a trusted research environment is, and now this is how it's going to be from now on. It has to be designed, started, and then optimized and iterated. It's that idea of, going out there, obtaining the data of what works, what doesn't, feeding back into the process. But it's process, it's a human thing, it's a policy thing, right? The technology is there. You can just come and utilize the technology to provide you all the security controls that you need. It's all there. But the conversation, the definition of what that configuration of security needs to be, needs to happen. What is an acceptable level of trust? How do we streamline it? How do we deploy it quickly? And then do that quick iteration and experimenting on a platform that allows you to do it quickly enough. Because if you go off and buy, something and plug it into the data center, and that's your system for the next 5 years, you're going to be stuck for 5 years. It has to be something that's agile, and you need to experiment quickly. That's my take on it.
I'm going to chime in on this one a little bit too, because I'm glad you brought up the word trust. So how many people are familiar with a gentleman named Sir Edwards Deming? Edwards Deming was at the forefront and led the whole aspect of continuous improvement, introduced the plan, do, check, act cycle of things back in the 60s. He was disowned by the Americans. The Japanese accepted him to rebuild Japan. And he used to use an interesting phrase. On, I think it's the American nickel, it said, "In God we trust." It's used all over the place. But he added a little other thing, said, "In God we trust, all others need data." And this was in the 60s. And one of the things that Edwards Deming emphasized is that data is only as good and as effective as how it was collected and when it was collected. This whole aspect of the speed of data, quite frankly, is a myth. Okay, data is being generated and has been all the time. And I think what we have to introduce is just a hint of cynicism. So here's a good example. Your shopping app is a great example. There's an article I read this weekend about all the political strife going on in the world, in Europe, North America. Heaven knows we don't have freedom in Canada. We need truckers to get it for us. But what's interesting is what's driving a lot of these challenges is the data on the news feeds and the apps. And the algorithms basically says, well, if you click here enough times, I guess that's what you want. I guess that's what you want to see. I guess that's what you want to hear. And it becomes the so-called echo chamber. You just hear yourself talk. And what this article hypothesized is said, take a contrarian thing and watch what happens to your news feed. The same thing has to be applied to all data. Okay, you have to take into account that time has to be involved in this thing. You can't rush through and just make a decision on, number one, point data. And yes, you can calculate an average and standard deviation on 2 points of data, but geez, the variance is kind of large. Okay, and I think we have to become more basically data savvy, teach statistics at grade 2. You could do that. And I think as we develop that skill set, this whole speed of data things becomes mute. It just becomes a non-issue because now people realize, oh, we've been dealing with data for our entire life. It's just how you deal with the information the data provides.
And I would just add to this, it's very important how this data is structured and does it address our needs. So you were mentioning about the skill sets, we are talking about the competency sets. We are all aware that there are gaps, but also fulfillments of certain skills in a proper way between the academia and industry. And I see that there is another keen person to add to this before we go to the next question. So please, Dr. Tina.
My comment is short. I just wanted to say that we're talking about soft skills as applied to college students, but the soft skills as applied to interpreting and making meaning from data are also really important here, because data is only as good as the meaning that you can draw from it. And so the skills of the people making that meaning do shape the way that that data functions or not for you as an educator, certainly.
There was a question, yes.
Yeah, just to segue from Dr. Alex and Dr. Christina points. For me, I would actually propose as educators in the current data boom, it's all about curation of the data and helping our students to be able to discern data from noise. And that's basically what Dr. Alex is talking about. We have to help our students discern data from noise. I would propose that a lot of the data, 60% of the data on the internet is noise. It's incorrect. All right? It's simply a half-truth. So what we have to do as educators now is train our students how to discern between what is data you can trust and data you cannot trust. And that means understanding the two things that Dr. Alex said. All right? How was the data collected? When was it collected? And when was it peer-reviewed? So I'd add a third element. To what degree has the data that you are looking at been validated? And if it has been validated, get rid of it. Don't even touch it. So I think the biggest challenge we have as educators is to be curators of knowledge, rather than the didactic era of just simply providing knowledge. Thank you.
I think that was a great conclusion of this discussion. Thank you very much, all of you, and thank to the audience for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really fun.
I have to give you my cards. I see that you're doing something.